Okay, great. I think we'll get started. So thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. My name is George Berghorn. I'm an adjunct assistant professor in the forestry department. My primary appointment at MSU is in the construction management program, where I'm an assistant professor there. I have the great pleasure to introduce Sarah Hines to you this afternoon, who's going to be giving today's Hanover talk. And before I get into her bio, I just want to say I had the pleasure of meeting her and members of her team down in Baltimore almost a year ago, so pre-COVID, if we can remember times when we were allowed to get on airplanes and travel out of the county and out of the state even. I had the great privilege to meet folks down in Baltimore as part of the Urban Wood Academy project, and Dan Brown from the Forestry Department had attended their earlier session last fall and recommended that I connect with those people and get down there to their next meeting. So learned a lot and immediately thought that the work that's going on down in Baltimore and the larger work that Sarah's a part of would make a great Hanover talk. We scheduled her to come in the spring for Hanover. COVID hit, sort of imploded those plans. And so now here we are in the fall, at least doing the virtual session. So to start, I'll say thank you, Sarah, for your flexibility and sticking with us through some of these changes that we've had to make. So just by way of introduction, Sarah Hines serves as a coordinator and project manager for the Urban Field Station Network within the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service, working with diverse communities to develop and advance knowledge and practical solutions to interrelated ecological, social, and economic issues and challenges. Sarah has spent her career in the Forest Service linking research with practice at local and regional scales to inform holistic stewardship of natural infrastructure and communities, ranging in scale from national forests to the local parks and forests in our communities. She received an AB in biological anthropology from Harvard and MS and MBA degrees from the University of Michigan. Before Sarah gets started, I also was asked to remind everybody of two things. The next Hanover talk, we're gonna skip a week, it looks like, so we'll be on November 10th, same time. So please join us for that if you're available. And then a reminder that our session today is being recorded. So if you do not wish to be recorded, please take this opportunity to turn your camera off now. And with that, welcome, Sarah, and we're looking forward to hearing your presentation today.
Well, thanks so much, George. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity to engage with you all, and great to see some familiar names and faces. As George was saying, I had the pleasure of meeting him and other members of his team over time. Dan Brown, Asia Downton, all from MSU, made the trip to Baltimore at various points to engage with us and around the topic of urban wood and learn from each other. I mean, we all learned so much during those times where we were able to get together in person on this particular topic. And then it began a conversation about how we could potentially engage more broadly. And so, as George mentioned, I coordinate this Urban Field Station Network in the Forest Service. And so I'm thrilled to talk with you all to the extent that I can illuminate the Forest Service in general, what we do, and then more specifically what we try to do in this Urban Field Station Network. And then also touch a bit up on urban wood. I'd love the chance to do that. This can be really informal, so happy to answer questions at the end, but also if folks have questions they want to popcorn out throughout, that's fine with me too, however you all want to run it. As George was saying, it was about, I was reflecting back, it was about 7 months ago where George and I were emailing back and forth, like, should I get on the plane next week? Should we do this or not? And, and then it became abundantly clear that everything was shutting down and we weren't going to be doing this in person, but it is a pleasure to engage with you virtually. The Forest Service actually has a long history of working with Michigan State University, with many of you. We have a field location in Lansing, so some of you may be familiar with the folks who work there. And as an agency, especially as a research and development part of our agency, we have a long history of partnering with universities, land grant institutions to co-produce science and knowledge and work together to serve stakeholders. So what I thought I'd do is just give you a kind of a broad overview of the Forest Service, and then let's see. Well, I'm skipping ahead. I'm going to give you a broad overview of the Forest Service and give you a little bit of a sense of the Urban Field Station Network and what we really emphasize there, including a lot of the questions that we seek answers to. And then touch on how we might engage together, as a university community and as a federal agency. But I want to go back to this moment that we are in, because obviously that has just framed so much of our day-to-day, month-to-month experience. With COVID, there are so many uncertainties. There are so many inequities. The inequities that were already abundant and obvious in our society have unfortunately grown more so. Broader awakening of these issues of racial injustice and social inequity, and the disproportionate effects on vulnerable populations and BIPOC populations. And within the urban forestry community, I think it really is important that we explore our own roles, the roles that we have and haven't played, how we can be more inclusive, of course, how we can augment dialogue and engagement. And urban forestry throughout all of this has really been on the front lines, both in terms of essential folks and workers and essential services and infrastructure. And especially over the summer, in communities suffering from the urban heat island effect and no longer able to access cooling centers in quite the same way with the same level of safety. It just became abundantly apparent where we were lacking, where we have to go as an urban forestry community in terms of making much faster and greater strides toward inclusion and equity and justice. And so I think, with that just in the back of our minds, that's just something that in the Forest Service we've been engaging with in the Urban Field Station Network ever more so, to think about how we should be doing more and better partnerships, how we can be serving all of our stakeholders, residents, everyone, a little bit more fully. So I just want to acknowledge that. And now, like I said, kind of get into a broad overview of the Forest Service. I apologize if some of this is a little bit boring or a little bit not entirely relevant, but, sometimes when, I found it helpful when I was a graduate student or a student to just sort of understand a little bit more under the hood of, these federal agencies, to the extent that some students might be interested in developing careers, other faculty might be interested in furthering connections and grant collaborations. So I'll just kind of put it out there that the mission you'll see right there, within the Forest Service, broadly speaking, we have a few primary branches. International programs is largely supported by USAID related funding to help transfer our knowledge and co-produce elsewhere. And the National Forest System, that's what most people think of when they think of the Forest Service. We have 193 million acres, I believe, that we steward on behalf of the American public. And many of these forests, these national forests, could now be considered urban national forests. And I'll get more into what that might mean in a second. We also have the state and private forestry branch. So we are responsible for helping to steward all of the nation's forests, not just the national forest, by providing grants and technical assistance and scientific expertise. Basically, you look at any scale, right? You would hope or imagine that managers might want best available science to figure out how to manage, how to face increasingly complex challenges and threats to forests and grasslands. And so state and private forestry tries to provision that. Where do they get that? That comes ideally often from research and development, as well as, like I said, research and development has a long history of showing up on campuses. We are often co-located with universities. We do a ton of our research in collaboration with especially land grant universities. And so it's all very much interconnected. but I'll try to get a little bit more into each of these in a moment. Little animation there. Just wanted to give you a sidebar of our organization mission, a little bit of a deeper dive. This is not anything, obviously, that you need to remember. In fact, it's probably something that you want to forget. But the National Forest System, those 193 million acres of public land that we steward, we've got a bunch of different regions, 9 to be exact, and they're subdivided a little bit differently than our research and development organizations, which are represented on the right. So there's a little bit of a one-for-one match in the east, but you'll see in the west, we've got this broad Rocky Mountain Research Station geographic footprint that covers 4 different regions. And we've got a Pacific Northwest Research Station that covers 2 different regions. So if ever you're kind of navigating the internal bureaucracy of the Forest Service and you're wondering, wait a second, why are the National Forest System regions different from research? Or you're just trying to figure out, it's not you, it's us. We also have these 2 research and development organizations that are thematic. So we have the International Institute of Tropical Forestry in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we also have the Forest Products Lab in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, I also mentioned urban national forests, and so I just wanted to go into this a little bit more because, you know, these national forests, when they were first established a century ago, might have been more typically rural, and some of them may still be, you know, more isolated, but for the most part, we have a huge number, almost all of our national forests in the east, and you'll see there, even in the west, in California, New Mexico, Colorado, you know, a huge number of acres are really in very close proximity to communities. And so it really is incumbent upon us to think about, how do we serve those communities more fully? How do we engage more fully? How do we make sure that, you know, we're providing access and recreation experiences for the good of, you know, the entire public. And so I also just wanted to mention there, I think it's worth mentioning that there's a kind of a shifting paradigm around recreation, something that used to be kind of geared toward a very sort of narrow demographic with an idea that it was all about kind of a work-play dichotomy, is becoming, thankfully, much more full and robust as we rethink the way human health matters, the way that, you know, recreation, it doesn't matter what the administrative boundary is, the way that people rely on the forest for all different purposes, not just kind of this traditional concept of play, but of getting out there and, you know, advancing cultural heritage, social and family ties, even foraging. You know, especially in New York City, we have huge, you know, huge numbers of, especially immigrant communities that look to, you know, the New York City parks as places where they can forage for, and even sometimes plant traditional food products, things like that. So, so now maybe backing up just a little bit and talking about the emphasis that we have these days, what kind of unites all of these different deputy areas, we like to call them, is this focus on shared stewardship. And so, you know, to those of you who are perhaps a little bit closer with the Forest Service may have heard about these shared stewardship agreements being signed among state foresters and with the agency. It's really a focus on trying to produce some outcomes at scale via, you know, pretty broad cross-boundary collaboration. It really emerged as an emphasis to change the paradigm around fire and how we deal with fire, because as you all know, it's kind of blown the lid off the Forest Service budget, certainly, but much more importantly, has just become a huge issue in terms of community well-being, climate, you know, forest health, all of the above. So a lot of what we think about is in this shared stewardship lens. And then below, you'll see kind of our 5 national priority research areas. So that's most of what I'll focus on in terms of the big picture. Now I'd like to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the urban realm and talk to you a little bit more about what I like to, the sandbox I like to play in. You know, I did, within those 5 national priorities, one of them is technology and science delivery. So we have a really robust effort across deputy areas to bring, oh, I'm missing a picture there, to bring some pretty great synthetic pieces of work and tools to our stakeholders. And I wanted to mention 3 of these in case, especially for students looking to learn more, these I think are some great resources. So we have the Vibrant Cities Lab on the left. You can see the website URL there. That's a collaboration with with American Forests. We have a monthly ongoing webinar series called Urban Forest Connections. Continuing education credits are available through ISA, as well as we provide certificates if you have other CEU credits that you might want to pursue. And that always ties together a researcher and practitioner perspective on a particular issue, and usually is a great experience and robust dialogue. And then the Cross-Pollinator is our new science synthesis publication, specifically looking at issues that cross these boundaries between forest and research and management and across gradients. And so I think are really neat ways to kind of stay on the cusp of what is happening in the community if folks are interested. But this Urban Field Station Network is a really wonderful and kind of a unique thing, in my opinion. So we have these place-based locations where we show up, and we have a lot of research scientists. We have research scientists based there, but oftentimes we have representatives of our other deputy areas. But I think the biggest thing that makes an urban field station what it is, it's a network of partners. And so it's not just the Forest Service. It really is kind of this robust network of partners in a particular place, co-producing knowledge about a broad range of topics. But if I had to boil it down, I would say the broad range of topics kind of fit into these 3 interrelated buckets that you see on the right: stewardship and engagement, forest and green space, and human health and well-being. And there's so much interplay among these themes. And there's so much, I mean, all of those are really, go hand in glove with science delivery and exchange. But if this term, and is probably not new to many of you, but if this term is new to some folks, I'd like to unpack it a little bit more. So knowledge co-production, really means kind of scientists and practitioners working together during every phase of the scientific cycle to everything from define the questions, to gather, collect, analyze the data together, to coming up with conclusions and applying the results. And it's really, it's easier said than done, really, because there are distinct characteristics for success for researchers and practitioners. Oftentimes practitioners need knowledge before the researchers have it or are ready to publish it. They have these very specific questions. They need different deliverables. Everyone knows researchers, need to publish. And do other things, of course, but many are, at the end of the day, evaluated based on publications and presentations, and practitioners need other deliverables. And so being able to work and explore and develop that space in between, I think, is a really unique and wonderful thing that takes dedication. It takes relationship building. And I think that's one of the things that the urban field stations have been successful at doing, because, we're not just there to develop a single research proposal. We're there in the long term. That's one of the good things about typically federal research investment, and especially federal, long-term ecological research, of which a couple of our field stations are involved. There's really an opportunity to do that long-term relationship building that yields these dividends that are really, really important for application. And so, like I alluded to, some of the key concepts are these different institutional relationship arrangements and deliverables, trust and embeddedness, and a willingness to try these new approaches. And so this could look very different according to, where you're looking. It can take different institutional forms, operate at different scales, and require different resources. It could range from a participatory research project that, you know, has a budget of $10,000 to, you know, a hybrid organization to a national and international community of practice. And I think we have examples of all of the above in the field station network. So this is a little bit of a rundown of what we do. I'm not going to do too much of a deep dive now. I'll touch on some of these later in sort of single slides, but I do want to just mention, you know, what's missing and how do we do better. At the beginning, I mentioned how I think we need to really focus on pushing beyond the folks that we traditionally partner with, the folks that we traditionally serve. And so, you know, in this pursuit of knowledge co-development and exchange, you know, what are we missing? One of the things that I think we've gotten a little bit better at recently, but still have a huge ways to go, is working with Indigenous communities and learning from each other, exploring traditional ecological knowledge, and you know, doing co-production much more robustly there. Again, with co-production, collaboration, and service, these are the organizations that we tend to work closely with. But who's missing? What's missing? And if folks have ideas too, I'd be happy to discuss that. So now I just want to get into some highlights about, I want to kind of present you with these top level questions, and in so doing, illuminate some of the resources that we've developed or co-developed that I would imagine could be useful if you're, you know, kind of studying forestry, if you're studying urban forestry, if you want to learn more. And I think it's important to frame our research around these top level questions, because I think, you know, oftentimes we miss, you know, the forest for the trees. We get into discussions about we have this tool and this program, but, you know, we miss kind of conveying the big picture of why. And especially as, you know, we increase kind of our concentric circles of engagement, and we're no longer talking to just the forestry community or just the sustainability community. We have to be pretty conversant with making a case in a way that resonates with people, figuring out what it is that resonates with them, and then kind of pivoting toward that and making the case right away. So, so these are some of the big picture questions that we've been focused on. And again, kind of welcome your feedback and curious as to what piques your interest. But this whole topic of how do trees save and improve lives, I mean, this is pretty much the embodiment of that health and well-being category. So much of what you'll find on the Vibrant Cities Lab consists of materials to make the case about why one might want to invest in your urban tree canopy. Materials for policymakers, advocates, folks like that. So case studies, research, etc. We also have a Nature's Impact on Human Health toolkit that we've co-developed with the Nature Conservancy that's currently being piloted. The 2020 pilot season was not exactly as we anticipated, but nonetheless, it's out there, and we're getting some early feedback and anticipate getting a little bit more feedback from some of the partners who are using this to try to assess, you know, this toolkit is really for on-the-ground partners who might not have, you know, they might not be huge, they might not have the ability to start, you know, a relationship with a research organization to frame and co-develop answers to questions, but they want to know how their greening interventions are making a difference in the community. What difference did the tree planting make? What difference did the, you know, natural areas restoration make, or even the sort of the nature-based playground that was installed, you know, how did that make a difference? So that's what this toolkit is intended to do. And then we have an ongoing suite of publications, one of which you see represented there, Urban Nature for Human Health and Wellbeing, which is a synthesis of all of the science, which is really, I think, a good tool and pretty compelling. why are our urban trees dying? So as many of you know, it's relatively easy to plant a tree, right, in an urban area, but it's pretty hard to keep that tree alive for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And it's really hard when you're kind of at the level of a municipality to figure out, how do I track and monitor these trees that I've planted over time, make sure that they're doing okay, track their general health, and figure out, how to use that, what variables to go out and track, and then how to use that monitoring data over time to inform development of the program and future investments. And so with that as the big picture framing, we have a number of resources which actually just recently came out: an urban tree monitoring field guide, resource guide, and training video playlist that's designed for practitioners at the municipal level, at the nonprofit level, even at the for-profit level, like Davy Trees or someone. I mean, they have their systems in place, but for people who want to figure out how to begin to develop a monitoring program that makes sense for them. What can urban and rural forestry learn from each other? We've spent the last number of years kind of hearing about this dichotomy or this divide between urban and rural communities. And, I think many of us understand that that's doesn't work that way, right? There are resource flows across gradients, economies, cultures, and forests. So basically, so many of our forest health, pest, and disease issues are across gradients. They may originate potentially in urban areas, but they spread to rural. So much of what's happening in urban forest context with respect to climate change, I mean, they're the harbingers of what's going to be happening in more rural, remote places in the next few years to decade. And so there's a lot that we can learn across boundaries. At the same time, these urban forested natural areas, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute, are in desperate need of restoration. And this type of restoration isn't like at the street tree planting scale, right? It's not at the pruning scale. It's at the scale of taking rural silvicultural practices and fine-tuning them for urban areas, figuring out what's palatable for a certain community and what's not. Certainly there have been, examples of controlled burns and even, potentially timber harvesting in some communities, but to the extent, but figuring out what works. And so we're doing a lot of research and a lot of partnership around that kind of what can we learn from each other. So what's driving resilience in our urban ecosystem? So I guess the question that I sometimes pose is, has the term urban forest obscured a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of our forest? We oftentimes think of urban forest as, the street trees and the yard trees, but this diagram right here kind of illuminates that there are these natural areas. I was talking about them earlier: urban forested natural areas, forest patches, call them what you will, but there are lots of typologies of urban forests and lots of strategies and that management strategies that could correspond. And so this is, again, sort of bridging the urban and the rural. But just to give you a few examples. So in New York City recently did an ecological assessment of their entire urban forest. And they found that, this was in 2018, I believe, there were over 4,000 hectares of forested natural areas that contained over 75% of the trees in New York City. So the vast majority of trees in New York City, not the vast majority, but the majority, 3/4 of the trees in New York City are in these urban natural areas that comprise only 7% of the land area. And these natural forested urban forested natural areas consist predominantly of native tree canopy and mid-story native forest community types. So unlike the sort of the broader urban context in which you'll find a lot of non-natives, a lot of introduced species, these forest patches, at least in New York City, and we're also finding in Baltimore and Philly and elsewhere, are incredibly native, native vegetation, and the soil types are pretty pristine. So kind of interesting. And let's see what else. How do we manage for a changing climate now? Again, this kind of gets to the issue of managers need to figure out what they're going to do for an ongoing and issue that's continues to exacerbate, get worse. And they don't really have time to hear about science results in 5 years. And when those results come out in 5 years, we all know they're going to be outdated anyway. So Leslie Brandt, who some of you may know, is doing a really cool project in the Mississippi National River Recreation Area along with partners. That's an urban national park along the river in that metro area. It extends over 54,000 acres along 72 miles of river, and it's visited by an estimated 9 million people annually. And so they've been hit really hard by EAB, and before that by a number of other stressors. Some of the areas are 40% ash cover, so you can imagine what they look like now or soon. And then because of an increase of heavy rain events and flooding, that's kind of impeded some natural regeneration of alternative species. And so managers in the park are interested in how can they help these ecosystems to adapt. And so this adaptive silviculture for climate change project, which was begun among a rural network, a network of rural forests and even experimental forests, has now kind of crossed over into this urban affiliate context in which scientists and managers are kind of co-developing 4 different treatment types along a climate change kind of gradient of, control, do nothing, resistance, resilience, and transition, to figure out in real time how to proceed and what to do. And we're interested in taking that model, taking that framework, and bringing it to several other communities in the East to basically begin to build out these prototypes that might transfer to other similar, ecologically similar cities. Another big picture question, how can we find threats before they become problems? So this is another different collaboration that we've been doing at the Nature Conservancy around healthy trees, healthy cities. It's an initiative on urban tree health monitoring and stewardship tracking, but it also includes a really helpful mobile app you can download for free that allows volunteers, they don't have to be highly trained. There are some training videos that go along, but the science has shown that even a Boy Scout troop with just kind of a very quick basic level of training was able to use this very effectively to basically community stewards, volunteers can do a non-stressor specific evaluation of tree health. So you have this gradient, and you can deploy volunteers broad scale to go out and monitor these trees, either that you've recently planted or that you're just interested in knowing about. And if you aggregate the data at a nationwide level, which we're increasingly working on doing as this initiative is rolled out in more and more cities, this gives us kind of an early detection for pests and threats that really helps complement existing systems and can help certain communities take proactive action if needed. Just a couple more examples, and then I do want to, I do want to get to some just conversation and Q&A. So I mentioned earlier this idea of inclusivity. And so what could a truly inclusive partnership landscape look like? So we have StewMap, which is a stewardship network mapping tool, first developed in New York City, but just interestingly just recently applied on the Bridger-Teton National Forest, and we have a web page. If you go to the StewMap overall website, you'll see there is a particular page for the National Forest application if you're interested. And the team is hopefully going to be doing some additional deployments on other national forests and potentially other public lands. But it's really a way of discovering who's at the table, who's not at the table, who has influence, what are groups doing, what could groups be doing. So it's a way to make engagement more inclusive, and it's a way to be a little bit more effective and efficient potentially when implementing, you know, anything from a restoration project to any sort of other activity. But just, you know, knowing who's out there and what they're doing and how folks and organizations are connected and how the network and how the information flows is kind of a key feature of that. Of course, a huge question, and one that is, you know, I think increasingly being talked about in a social justice context is, what does our tree canopy look like? Why? It's not accidental. The way that tree cover oftentimes corresponds very directly with homeowner loan corporation maps that were developed in the 1930s and 40s, and goes hand in glove with, you know, previous redlining practices and things like that. So oftentimes the wealthiest communities have the highest tree cover, and that, you know, that is something that federal policy helped to create almost 100 years ago, and it's something that we intentionally need to undo and work to rectify in this day and age. And so, you know, understanding where our tree canopy is, where it isn't, can be very, you know, important from very baseline of where can we plant trees to achieve our tree canopy goals. But also there are so many additional layers that we can explore and are beginning to explore along with others. And then very importantly, what's happening to our nations and our world's urban forests. You know, in the last, I think it was a 5-year period, our global tree canopy cover ticked down by almost 1%. And then nationally, getting a handle on what's happening and why is critically important. As we were beginning this, I mentioned to George that our, you know, of the COVID casualties, we weren't able to deploy our typical urban FIA field crews this summer. And so next summer, hopefully, things will be a little bit more back to normal, and they'll try to probably do a double data season, which is always challenging. But we're just beginning to get information back from some of our earliest cities that completed this 7-year cycle. Some cities chose to accelerate it. Other cities that were just early on are just now finishing the cycle, while others are, you know, coming online. And it's a 7-year annual interval, unless cities pay to accelerate. So because this was begun in 2014, we're over the next few years going to really begin to get in a lot more data, and that is being made available on this My Cities Trees app and through various reports. The reports are typically take a little bit more time than the My Cities Trees app. And then I presume many of you have heard of iTree, but iTree has it's an entire kind of empire suite right now, and it has a lot of different tools to get at the different types of benefits that trees provide. There's also an iTree Academy. The sessions have been posted, but for the spring semester, there's an upcoming fall semester. If you're interested, there's a link there. But it's probably one of our most well-known tools. And then finally, I'll just mention we're beginning to explore a little bit more fully and more rigorously, how can art and science together advance our critical thinking, knowledge co-production, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for 3 years now, the New York City Urban Field Station has hosted artists in residence, and they actually have a great spot where folks can stay in Fort Tatton if they're interested. Although it doesn't have to be, it's more of an engagement. The residency is kind of based around an engagement with scientists. And now we've expanded that to a number of our other locations. And next year, we're looking at expanding further. We actually had an applicant from, it was close to MSU. I'm not sure exactly where in Michigan, but it was someplace close by. So anyway, I think it's a really neat opportunity to kind of advance what we're trying to do. And then finally, and I mentioned that I would talk a little bit about this, but I'm kind of running out of time, so I might leave it to you all to check out this video later at your leisure and these other resources. But how can wood improve lives, communities, and economies? So in brief, what we did in Baltimore a number of years ago, working with partners again, is just look around us and realize there's a lot of wood being wasted. There are, 16,000 officially, much more unofficially, vacant homes and properties. There's a ton of urban trees coming down in storms, et cetera, et cetera. Why is this wood just going to the landfill? Why are these homes, when the city has the money to take them down because they're unfortunately a source of blight on the landscape, why are they being demolished rather than deconstructed? And so we began a partnership, and it became very successful. We ended up creating a line of furniture in partnership with Room and Board. A lot of people became involved, and it was really robust. I say was because has continued to evolve in a COVID era, but we've increasingly been able to work with other cities that are interested in standing up urban wood economies, work with the Urban Wood Network nationally. There's going to be a little academy add-on to the Partners in Community Forestry conference next week or 2 weeks from now. But anyway, the gist of it is that we can create jobs, improve lives, and improve our use of resources by reclaiming this wood. And especially in communities like Baltimore, where the joblessness rate is incredibly high, people need an entry point. It was just an all-around really awesome solution for this really awesome material that just doesn't exist anymore. So we have an urban wood book, and we have a cool video, actually a number of them. This one happens to be the one that Room and Board made when they sort of launched their urban wood project Baltimore furniture line. They now have other urban wood project furniture lines for other cities. So that's really cool. And I mean, the ultimate goal is just to create an urban wood economy, that gets people, artisans, manufacturers, all working toward this great end of putting people to work, not wasting things, producing domestically. It's good stuff. So anyway, I do want to leave time for questions. I'm sorry I've probably yapped your ear off. I just want to put out there, in terms of engaging with Michigan State University, we'd love to continue exploring how we can work together. So, at the very least, if you're interested in some of the new content, new research coming out of the Forest Service, please sign up. There's a link. I'll share this presentation after, for our webinar series and our cross-pollinator science synthesis publication, like I mentioned. Check out the Vibrant Cities Lab. But I wanted to mention that our network locations often host students. Some come from just the summer. They may have their own funding, or they may not. We can explore things. Students, if there are credits available, we can definitely make that work. Like I said, New York City has lodging available in the post-COVID realm. And then there's this official USDA Pathways program, which offers a number of different kind of entree points for either seasonal or temporary, or else full-time permanent employment with the federal government, with the Forest Service. And I started my career with the Forest Service through the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, and the Forest Service has a very robust cohort, does a great job of I think leadership development and training through that program. And so I'm just always happy to be a resource. Reach out anytime if you have interest. Happy to just continue the conversation. So that's all I have. Thank you so much, and happy to chat or take questions.
Great. Well, thanks, Sarah. Please, if you have questions, Sarah has agreed she'll take your questions or discussion points on. If you'd rather type them into the chat, I'll handle that for you if you'd rather do it that way.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Hi, I'm Stella Cousins. I'm a research scientist, forest ecologist at University of Michigan. Thanks for your talk. It's neat to learn about the Urban Field Station Network and some friends that use it, so it's nice to hear more about it. I was curious about the Health and Wellbeing Program, which is affiliated with TNC. I think I may have got the title a little wrong, but what are the evaluation tools that are used to gauge health outcomes in the community? And are those kind of the typical social program assessment tools, or are they being combined with ecosystem focused assessments of what's going on like in the environment?
Yeah.
Are they traditional or novel?
Sorry, what was the last part?
I was just elaborating. Are they kind of the traditional tools for social programs for nonprofits, or are they more like novel, kind of new approaches to measuring those things?
So I think there's a novel component to it. So yeah, with the Nature Conservancy, like I said, I kind of mentioned that these are designed for, you know, the typical practitioner entity that doesn't necessarily have or doesn't have the resources or desire to develop a robust relationship with a research institution to really do a deep dive into the efficacy of their planning interventions. Definitely kind of it uses a social assessment questionnaire that can be administered via a survey link or via a conversation. We are also developing a focus group questionnaire, so you could take the form of a focus group to understand a little bit better the social determinants of health and how those relate to the green intervention in question. So those feelings of hope, connectedness, things like that tend to convey a person's sentiments about their own life and their own trajectory, as well as that of their communities. And can those be augmented by investment in or relationship with a greening effort as well? And I think the novel thing about it is that it takes it, you know, I think we've always, I would say in the Forest Service, the Urban Field Station Network really tries to bring a social ecological perspective. We oftentimes default to kind of a hard data perspective, and I think one of the things that our social scientists involved in the network have just been tremendous at over the years is elevating the importance of social data and storytelling and sort of new ways of knowing and understanding. And so what the questionnaire and the focus group intends to do is also capture those stories and those vignettes about change, about perspective. And I think coming from organizations like the Forest Service and the Nature Conservancy, kind of putting it out there that these vignettes are just as compelling pieces of data as like the hard data that we're used to, I think is a little bit of a paradigm shift. So yeah, that's my perspective on it. Does that help?
That's great. I think that's really true that combining something like FIA data with a really compelling story or like program evaluation can be even more powerful than those kind of siloed data sources on their own. So thanks.
Yeah.
Sarah, we've got a question in the chat from Kevin Sayers, who asks, a few years ago, there were discussions between the Forest Service, Michigan DNR, MSU, and others regarding the possibility of establishing a new urban field station in southern lower Michigan along the Lansing, Grand Rapids, Detroit corridor. Do you have any knowledge or update about that?
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for that question. I do remember when those conversations originated. I think that was our previous assistant director for research, Tom Schmidt, who's since retired, was a particularly strong executive champion for that. I know that there's definitely still interest, but we've been going through, I would say, a lot of leadership changes, everything from the administration just de-emphasizing the importance of some of this, as well as our station director kind of focused on other priorities. So I think that has been backburnered in my, like, I'm just kind of speaking unofficially, backburnered but not forgotten. And I do think that it offered, and that's the direction that the urban field stations and the network wants to go, is we have these kind of anchor big cities. And I'm sorry, I probably didn't even mention them except in passing with respect to various projects. But as some of you know, New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Denver, Los Angeles, so these really big hubs, but we need more Springfield, Massachusetts, which we just kind of made into an urban field station. We need more Lansings. We need, more Bozeman, Montanas. And so I think in the sort of the next iteration of what the network looks like, those are very much kind of top of mind.
Great. Had another question come in, Sarah, from Asia Doughton. She said, can you share more details about the Artist in Residence program? Is the goal to work with the artists to develop materials through which to educate the public about forestry, to provide an educational opportunity for the artists themselves, or something else? Also so exciting that there is related work going on in DR. Who are some of the partners that are a part of that work?
Yeah, thanks, Asia. Great question. So, the New York City Urban Field Station, I think, has always been just like inherently innovative and as part of their DNA, even more so than perhaps, I don't know, it's hard to say, than some of the other urban field stations. So they've been doing, like I mentioned, this for 3 years, and this is the 4th year where now we've expanded it. And we're finally at this point where it's like, okay, we've been doing this, and now we need to put together a study plan about it. And that's kind of really important in terms of advancing the science and making it a real thing, and bringing it to kind of a higher level to get support for it. And I think part of it is definitely that conveying of scientific information and bringing it to a larger audience. But I also think that part of it is just this like beautiful collaboration that pushes the boundaries and pushes scientists to develop better science by having someone who embodies a different but overlapping realm asking the questions, and vice versa. And so as we put together the study plan, and by the way, I would love your eyes on it if you have interest and time when it's ready, but really is using it as, first of all, like an immediate tool to increase our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, because the federal government, as you know, can be slow. And so like doing what we want to do in the urban field station right away can be challenging. But in our call for artists this year, we got 104 applicants, and I think 58 of them met our criteria for enhanced kind of DEI, which was awesome. It demonstrated that we were really reaching an audience that was much more representative of the public that we serve. So doing that, and then really helping us kind of drive at those science questions from new ways, and spark an emotional kind of engagement with the science. So it's a little bit, we're trying to make it a little bit more than just conveying what we do. I'm sorry, I probably didn't articulate that really well, but that's the hope. And then with the stuff in the Dominican Republic, that's mostly kind of centered in our International Institute of Tropical Forestry, which is kind of housed primarily in San Juan, but serves that entire kind of tropical region. And so Jerry Bowers, our contact there, I'd be happy to connect you with him if you're interested. And then the link to the artist residency is live. I mean, the call for applicants just closed. We're in the process of evaluating, and we haven't yet announced the 2020 cohort, but that's coming very soon.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah.
Sure.
We have time for a couple more questions if there's anybody else that would like to ask anything of Sarah.
Hey, Sarah, this is Kevin Sayers again. I don't know if you noticed the comments that were made about mobilizegreen in the chat. Do you know anything about that?
I haven't been tracking the chat. Despite the 7 months of Zoom, I'm still kind of a Zoom newbie. So But Mobilize Green, yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with that, but not as familiar as I should be. And I'm kind of blanking right now, trying to access the chat actually.
Yeah, it was just a reference to a job posting for, I think they're recruiting in a lot of different urban areas for resource assistants that'll be placed in national forests around the country. And one of the areas is Detroit. They've got a recruiting call, I think.
Yeah, so I think this is with American Forest and Sarah Anderson. Is that right? Maybe
I'm not sure.
I think I'm exposing my ignorance right now. I feel like I just encountered that in the past month, maybe even with Eric Candela and Sarah, but I can't remember. So I'm sorry that I don't have much more information for you, Kevin, and obviously something that I need to look into a little bit more.
Nope, that was new to me too, so I'll look it up.
Okay.
Got time for another question or two if there's anybody else out there that would like to ask.
George, I just want to say you've given me great hope for the future. You've got MSU and University of Michigan folks here together in this great seminar series. Thanks for pulling it together. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, this has been great. Really glad we were able to make this work. And again, seemed like sort of a twisty path as COVID shut our original plans down. So it was great to see this come to fruition. So if there's nothing else, please join me either with real applause or virtual applause. And thanks Sarah for her presentation today. It was really great. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
And
everyone. I really
Sarah,
appreciate it.
good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks so much, everyone. Stay healthy and safe.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.